Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time to welcome back our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, LibertyNation.com, legal affairs editor, podcast director, and chief cook and bottle washer at LibertyNation.com, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim. How are you?
Every week, the chain of titles gets longer.
Yes.
But lest we bore our interested listeners right off the radio or online, let's go right to the videotape, as Warner Wolf used to say. Backpage. Federal prosecutors lied, asserting opposite of what they knew was true. Meaning what?
That the prosecutors who have railed against the Backpage website and its operators as being people who are basically guilty of trafficking children as sexual slaves, the exact opposite is true. They were aides to law enforcement in rescuing children who were being trafficked and did everything they could to make sure that that wasn't the case. Tim, right from the FBI agent's report, quote, unlike virtually every other website that is used for prostitution and sex trafficking, Backpage is remarkably responsive to law enforcement requests and often takes proactive steps to assist in investigations. So this is Backpage was one of the top 500 websites in the country, Tim, when the FBI seized it under the pretext that it was being used for illegal child sex trafficking.
What is Backpage.com as it's presented to the public?
Well, what it was before it was seized was a classifieds website that had all sorts of classified ads, from you could sell a lawnmower to a car, but was chiefly used for the sale of commercial sex by adults to other adults. That couldn't be abided, though, and we have, just like Tim, I think there's an insufficient quantity of white supremacists in the country for progressives, so they have to create.
Scott, there's the Ku Klux Klan has 7,000 members in the United States.
They couldn't even fill one Vegas hotel with every Klan member in the country, Tim. It's ridiculous. And that's actually a high estimate, by the way. 3,000 is a more conservative.
Okay, I've heard anything from 3,000 to 7,000 in the Ku Klux Klan, but of course the left will say, oh, they've just moved on to start other organizations.
So they've had to create.
There's no point.
They've had to create them in order to sort of continue up their crusade. And the same is true with child sex trafficking. It's a celebratory moment. Fortunately, there isn't that much child sex trafficking, and to the extent that there is, Backpage has nothing to do with it. But it became a great target for prosecutors who are political actors. Kamala Harris made her way to the U.S. Senate on the back of criticizing Backpage, and the founders of that company are now in the dock in Arizona awaiting criminal trial next year.
Doctored images have become that much more common on the internet these days. People photoshopping stuff, putting it up to attack or smear other people or make it seem that there's something that they're not.
And deep fakes coming too.
And deep fakes. But police departments using photoshopped images for criminal identification lineups is not something you would expect to see, but apparently in Portland, Oregon, that's what they're doing.
It's pretty shocking. I think we really need to stay on top of, Tim, these photo manipulation and video manipulation cases, because in the future, how are we going to be able to tell evidence, when evidence is presented, if it's genuine or not? I don't know if you saw in the news this week, there was the Jordan Peterson website issue. That somebody had created a website that was called Not Jordan Peterson. And you could type words into it, and it would sound like Jordan Peter was saying those words. But, of course, he wasn't, and they shut that down. Well, the police in Portland wanted to basically implicate this man called Tyrone Allen in a bank robbery crime. The problem was Mr. Allen had facial tattoos, and the witness to the robbery didn't report any facial tattoos. So when they did, when they did the photo array lineup, they airbrushed out his tattoos, and sure enough, he gets picked. Well, guess what? That seems awfully fast and loose with identification. We don't yet know, Tim, whether the courts in Oregon, whether the state courts or the federal circuit courts will declare this unconstitutional. It has been challenged, and we're awaiting a ruling now to see if it will be held as legal or not, this kind of manipulation.
How can it be legal? How could it be ruled that it is legal if the police are manipulating pictures, whether it's a lot or a little, if they go down the road of manipulating pictures, what comes next?
It's a slippery slope, and given the future of, well, actually, I shouldn't even say the future, given the present of what's capable in terms of photo manipulation, right? You may say, okay, well, if you take off a tattoo, that's obvious. What if you add a mustache or a beard? What if you lengthen or shorten hair? I agree that it's most troublesome and should be ruled unconstitutional, but we'll have to see.
The point is you can't
it's
present
offered,
it
in
as
this case,
fact.
In this case, it's offered for the purpose of implicating that person in the crime, but it's not actually a photo of that person. So, it's hard to see how it will pass muster, but the police in Portland think it will, and so do the prosecutors there.
Now, the battle over what people can be forced to do against their religious beliefs continues. It's taken place mostly in tiny, obscure bakeries dotted across mostly the western U.S., and now it's moved on to videographers who have a First Amendment right not to make same-sex wedding videos, according to the Eighth Circuit.
You know, when I read the story, I thought of you, Tim, because for people who don't know, you and your wife for a long time operate a boutique video production company.
I thought you were going to say I was part of a same-sex marriage.
No.
The way you sort of aligned that together there, I wasn't sure.
A boutique video production company that aligned with your religious values, oftentimes, and political values. And I'm sure that those were thoughtful choices. And if somebody came in and said, we'd like you to produce a Satan-worshiping video, for instance, or one that, lionized collectivism or something like that, you would say, no, we don't want your money. Thank you. Go somewhere else. We're not interested in that kind. We're not going to put our efforts behind that. And that's what happened here. Carl and Angela Larson, they make wedding videos, and they wish to not do so for homosexual marriages. And they say that their First Amendment right to not be compelled to speak through the art of their video production guarantees them the right to not have to do that. And thankfully, I think it was a 2-1 decision, but that's what the court said. I'm losing my place as to what what circuit it was in. It was the Eighth Circuit. Excuse me.
Eighth Circuit.
So that's what the Eighth Circuit said. So that's the rule right now in the Eighth Circuit only. It could be the rule in other of the judicial circuits, but we don't know. Currently, the case on point here is the Masterpiece Cake Shop case out of Colorado, but that case yielded no bright line ruling or precedent that we can rely on because the Colorado Human Rights Commission was so bigoted against the religiosity of the Masterpiece Cake Shop owner that the Supreme Court said, well, we can't even rule on whether or not it's a First Amendment issue because they discriminated against him because of his religion. So really the nuts and bolts of it is that this case may, in fact, go to the Supreme Court. We have to see. Surely there will be a split in the circuits at some point. This issue will go to the Supreme Court, and they will have to rule whether or not the First Amendment requires states to be hands-off with their must-work rules for homosexuals.
A split in the circuits, for those uninitiated, means that different circuit courts come up with different rulings, which means it would have to ultimately be settled by the Supreme Court. There is no higher court in the land. Just to put a finer point on it, in many ways, what you described for me, which is, let's say a Satan-worshiping video that we would have to produce, or let's say one that is lauding Adolf Hitler, and you ask a Jewish videographer to put that together.
Or any human being that understands what Adolf Hitler did.
In a sense, you can't. It's not even possible for somebody to do that because of the artistic imperative, which we've talked about frequently, that requires someone to understand and at least sympathize, if not empathize, with the subject. It's not even possible. So the forcing people to do it.
You could also say that I can't put out the quality of the product that I want. In other words, I'm not willing to put my name behind that production, irrespective of the content, because I'm against that content. I won't be able to actually produce something that this company can be proud of, which is what we're about. You're actually denigrating the name of the company then.
That's what it comes down to. That's exactly what I was saying. Now, California's top court finally is allowing law enforcement agencies to share a list of problem cops with prosecutors. And the problem with this is...
Oh, union rules, Tim,
Yes.
which is, I think, perhaps the biggest stumbling block to a situation in America where the people and the police have some kind of detente, and we don't have this continual friction where so many people feel put upon and set upon by the police, and the police in turn feel like they're occupiers. In other words, that they're not respected at all by the community, and that they're putting their lives on the line for that community. What happens is you have these horrible cops that aren't disciplined, and they're allowed to remain on the force. It's a cancer that eats away. And if you're, how many instances, interactions do they have to have with the public before the public gets sullied against all the other officers?
Well, the people who should be against this type of action or lack of action against dirty cops, crooked cops, violent cops who go over the line should be other cops, because it ruins it for the rest of them. They get painted with a broad brush, and the left is on that case big time, as we know.
So the LA County sheriffs wanted to send this list of 300 problematic deputies to prosecutors so that they could disclose their problems to defense and not have bad cases go to court. But the union, Tim, their union sued to make sure that they weren't released. And this case resolves that dispute and says absolutely that it is legal for the department to go ahead and forward those names. And what I was going to say is so much of the friction, Tim, is because of these union contracts. It's the reason why you'll see it takes so long, for instance, for Eric Garner's killer to be fired, okay, or a cop who is fired with seemingly good cause, but then you read about a year and a half later he's hired back at full back pay and benefits. How is that? Well, because of the union contract that the city signed. And unfortunately, it's just a feature of a municipal union that there is no strong advocate on the other side of the bargaining table saying, well, hey, let's make sure that these bargaining requirements are a little bit more in favor of the people because they're not voting or donating like the police officers are and the union representatives.